Hello, it's Philip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London. This morning I'm looking at a book which has come to us from Wildy, Simmonds and Hill Publishing. The book is called Cases, Causes and Controversies, 50 Tales from the Law, and it's been compiled and written by James Wilson. Elizabeth and I talked about the book together and we came up with our book review title as follows. Clearly a book for the serious criminological gossip, and a crackingly good read too, and that's exactly what it is. Let me show you the book first and then we'll talk about the review. There's an interesting picture on the front. We'll more about that in a minute. That's some information about the book on the inside front cover, and on the back there is some information about the author. You can see there. He comes from New Zealand. The cover photograph is the Charles Fryatt Memorial, Liverpool Street Station. You probably may have seen it if you've been at the station. The book itself is a hardback, and you can see, there we go, cream colour. Runs to just under 250 pages. There's the index at the back, and it has page numbering, so you should find things quite quickly. It's quite a big index, which I rather liked. Then after that you've got an afterword, what next for the common law. This book is a little older, it's been around for a little while now. There's the front page there, and that's the copyright is 2012, so I'm recording it a few years later in 2017. It's not a book that is time sensitive. There's a very nice dedication which I always like to show, and then you get the various content sections, starting on the chapter. Part 1, Victorian Murders, Hollywood on Trial, Law and War, Personal Battles. Running all the way through. In fact, there are a total of 10 parts and 50 chapters, as it says, 50 tales from the law. And you can quite easily find a lot of very interesting information here, which you may be quite aware of from your own knowledge of what's going on. It starts off with an introduction. This is just the acknowledgements I've shown you there. And it starts off an introduction to explain what the purpose of the book is. Then it kicks off straight away into Victorian murders. And frankly, a lot of it's a little gruesome, I suppose. But there again, that's the problem. The public seem to like it, which is unfortunate, but there again, that's the way it is. Now, what we're saying, we're talking about cases, causes and controversies. So there'll be a lot of areas of probably quite substantial interest to a general readership. And as I said, the criminological gossip will have a field day, if I can put it that way. So what do we say about the book? Well, we say Wilders have published this excellent short book on cases, causes and controversies, 50 Tales in the Law by James Wilson, and they, we think, are to be congratulated, that's the publishers, and plus of course the author, for producing another compelling criminological work which will be of great interest, we think, to specialists, practitioners and general readers as at a time of renewed interest in this area of law, the controversy area, which is always going to be with us because people do have this idea of conspiracy theories and all sorts of things which makes up the fascinating human condition. But it's refreshing to have the varied titles which Wildy, Simmonds and Hill produce brought together with the main legal works they have in their portfolio, and this is one that's, I think, of as I said before, much more general interest, certainly to anybody who follows legal issues. Some of the areas the writer covers begins with the following question, and I've taken this from some of the blurb. What do the Prince of Wales, Ian Botham, Victoria Gillick, Bette Davis, and a man whose family grave appeared in the background of a splatter horror film, what do they have in common? Wilson answers, and again this is in all of the blurb here, each of them felt they had been wronged in some way, and each went to court to try to do something about it. Now you can read obviously a lot more about this in the book and in the advertising material, and these people were often what we determine as hard cases, and Wilson goes on to say that sometimes their case was a purely private argument. There are rather a lot of those I hasten to add with neighbour disputes, whilst others brought cases of national importance, that's Gillick, or claims which raised acute moral and ethical principles likewise. So you can see the the basic way in which he's going. He concludes that the result that some won handsomely, while others lost so badly they ended up far worse off than when they started. Well, that's always the danger when you start suing people. Never go to law unless you can avoid it, is the answer. Therein lies the tale for the future. As I've said, never go to law unless you want to end up in a book like this entertaining legal read. Fortunately, some clients do not heed their warnings given to them by their legal team. Whilst commentators say that people don't read many law books these days, but I think that's actually a fallacy, because this is a cracking good read. It's a new work which looks actually at 50 legal disputes, starting with the Victorian times until now, where, and there's a quote here, a compelling moral or legal issue was at stake, or where the background of the case was interesting, amusing, or infuriating. Just the sort of juicy stuff, then, for the reader to intellectually gnaw on. And I certainly found it very easy to read, apart from anything else, and it's a tribute, of course, to the excellent style that Wildy's adopt. Wilson starts with 3 homicides during the Victorian times, including the jurisprudential favourite of Dudley and Stevens, known, I'm sure, to many people. That's the case of the shipwrecked sailors eating the cabin boy and later facing trial for murder. It's disgusting, but unfortunately true and philosophically interesting, if unpalatable for those who shouldn't be reading law anyway if they don't like to discuss these matters. I'm sorry if I sound a bit snooty here, but frankly we do have to deal with some very disgusting things, and that's just the way it is. And not necessarily, I would suggest, in the criminal jurisdiction either. Wilson then covers cases ranging from the early days of the more sordid aspects of Hollywood, if anything much has been changing there, but I hope it has, and then the 2 World Wars, through to recent battles over the super injunctions sought by very, very rich people. And then it looks at MPs' expenses, and then to the continually vexed relationship between religion and the law, and to the often hazy relationship, as it's described, of law and sport, characterised today by the Football Association. Seems to be taking on the role of the Crown Prosecution Service and the police and the judiciary in dealing with the very, very wealthy footballers. Surely a further jurisprudential work is in the making for the avid sports follower, together with charities acting as prosecutors. As you know, the government have been looking at that again, not happy about some of the prosecutions that take place. But again, these are very interesting areas and of great public interest for the readership. Of course, some of the stories border on the absurd and need inclusion in the late Gary Slapper's weird cases. Poor old Gary is no longer with us, but the books were wonderful, and I do hope the mantle will be taken on by others, because we're always going to have these weird cases, and they really are quite interesting. Questions like, why did the legendary tough international sportsmen like Botham and Lamb show no fear in the face of hostile fast bowling on the pitch, yet go to their lawyers when their old opponent Imran Khan said something they didn't like in the newspaper? Perhaps they have too much money and not enough sense. Well, it's only a suggestion. I wouldn't dare to say anything factually about this, but it's a possible suggestion. It might possibly be the case that they have a little bit more money and some sense sometimes. But we could say that about a lot of clients, couldn't we? Although you probably can't get away with telling a client a truism. That's one of the problems. Now, as the author reports, irony runs through many of the cases. And Betty Davis, or Bet Davis, who was left penniless after losing her case in England and felt she had no option but to return to the States and resume working for the studio, she had unsuccessfully sued, for which they were very grateful, although we never discuss control. There is the great ending, because after doing so she became one of the richest and most acclaimed actresses in history. They're an excellent actress. So well done, Betty, and we all liked her films anyway. Certainly I did. The irony is less happy, and when she was younger she was particularly good too, if I may say so. The irony is less happy in other examples, such as the Indigenous rights campaigner Eddie Embo. He won a great victory for his people, but was shunned by them during his lifetime and never lived to see his final legal victory. Such is life for many a campaigner, I'm afraid. Then there are what Wilson calls the outright tragic examples. That includes the execution of the civilian Charles Fryatt by the Germans during the Great War, That's an example which shocked not only his own side but neutral observers of the day as well, and of course that's where he is on the front of the book. Now in modern times, the blameless good citizens Diane Pretty and Debbie Purdy were stricken with terminal illnesses. This is a very difficult area in jurisprudence and philosophy, of course, and they were forced to seek legal approval for their desire to end their lives at a time of their own choosing. This is the end-of-life plan. Now, it's a very difficult matter. I've had to face this with members of my family. It is a terribly difficult issue, and there is no answer. Let's just get that right. There's no answer. They are hard cases, and we're most grateful, I think, to Wilson for highlighting these hard cases in such an accessible way. They're not going to go away. They're there, and we will have to face them, whatever happens. The book itself is written in a clear, accessible style, free of legal technicalities, and I think will be of great interest to not simply to lawyers, but anyone interested in stories of great human interest and how the legal system tried to deal with them. Certainly applied to criminologists would find it very useful. Let me conclude as a quote. The accounts of each case are interesting and include something new for everybody. That's exactly what he's done here. That's what makes this title and similar ones by Wilde is, in my view, such a great series of stories for the avid legal reader. And as I said, time is not a big problem with this because I've had this book for a while and I thought I really must review it, and I have done now. There it is. This is the unmitigated tragedy, Diane Pretty and Debbie Purdy. There we go. It is a very sad story, and you've got other cases here. Crime in Our Time. What I did like is sometimes he puts a little afterword in, which gives you some idea. It's nice to have that. It gives you some idea of what has happened since. But do remember, it's 5 years ago since the book appeared, and it's one to treasure. So do get a copy and do have a read of it. And once again, thank you to everybody concerned for an excellent read. Bye-bye.